Week. We're seeing 70% of jobs now being accessed through an apprenticeship, which is really helping young women get into STEM careers. And finally, by helping women who have got experience and worked in STEM, who've perhaps left the profession, to return to STEM, the workplace, with our STEM Returners project.
Mr. Speaker, university technology colleges are a good place for young women to start in STEM, and I welcome the new UTC in Southampton, which will provide extra places that Portsmouth UTC is unable to offer. 6,000 girls attend UTCs around the country, of which 82% go on to apprenticeships, university or straight into employment. Most of those are in STEM careers. Will my honourable friend agree that UTCs provide a great start to a career in STEM, and the proposal for UTC sleeves in secondary schools will help more girls into STEM careers?
Minister.
Absolutely agree with her. University technical colleges provide an excellent experience for young people, not just academically, but also in the technical skills that they provide. They've also got excellent links with industry, which provides great work experience for those pupils. And I'm really pleased that her local young people have such great options for UCT provision.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much for her answer? Minister, in Northern Ireland, I'm always encouraged by the number of young ladies and young girls who wish to be involved in the science and technology and mathematics, because they can do the job every bit as well as a man can do. But is it not important, Minister, to ensure that companies who wish to employ people do more to encourage young ladies to take up the jobs? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, the honourable member for Strangford is absolutely right. The government can't do it all. We do need industry as well. But there are some great examples. We've got a £17 million programme scholarship now for AI and data science conversion courses. We've also got the UK Space Agency investing £15 million into diverse workforce streams, particularly for young women, to help them get into the sector too. He's absolutely right. We need to work hand in glove with industry.
Barry Sherman.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We all know that women take the bulk of caring responsibilities. The Carers Leave Act regulations will come into force on the 6th of April across England, Wales and Scotland, meaning unpaid carers can take a week of unpaid leave from the workplace, knowing that their jobs are protected as a result.
Barry Sherman.
The ministerial team knows that it's absolute scandal that in all these years of Conservative so-called popular government, we have seen such a bad deal for early years, for carers, for women, talented women, legions of them, who want to use their talent at work but are stopped by the highest childcare costs in the world.
Minister.
Well, I would respectfully say to the honourable gentleman that God gave us 2 ears and a mouth for a reason, and I would encourage him to put his listening ears on to hear the track record of this government, whether it is improving payment for carers or whether it's introducing groundbreaking legislation to introduce flexible working from day one, shared parental leave, paternity leave, parental leave. We've now got the kinship carer strategy, which was launched in December, which is looking at a funding model for kinship carers. We have gone further than any government with a plan to improve the lives of carers and value the work that they do.
SNP spokesperson Kirsten Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That right to flexible working would particularly benefit workers with caring responsibilities, the majority of whom are women. Unfortunately, the UK Government's response to its consultation on flexible working simply doesn't go far enough to provide some of the real practical support needed by many people with caring responsibilities. Last week, Nikki Pound of the TUC told the Women and Equalities Committee that 1 in 3 requests for flexible working are denied by employers. So what steps are the UK Government taking to really support workers with caring responsibilities and ensure that flexible working is a day one right by default?
Minister.
Well, I speak as a carer myself, holding down a full-time job, so I know the difficulties that are involved there. And that is why the government passed the legislation for flexible working for day one. We've introduced parental care, which is 18 weeks of leave entitlement for parents. That is on top of the carers leave regulation, which comes into force from the 6th of April. This government has gone further than any other government in introducing those rights for carers.
Jamie Stone.
Number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government understands the importance of this issue, and I have recently met with key stakeholders representing disabled people such as Disability UK and Cross Whitehall colleagues.
Stone.
Mr. Speaker, I have a constituent called Mr. Peter Baudet, He has a severe lung condition which necessitates the use of oxygen. He has mould in his house, the mould is going off his clothes. He can only afford 2 small electric heaters. I would be very grateful if a minister could meet with me very briefly to discuss this rather difficult situation.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and of course thank my honourable colleague for raising this particular issue. And I speak on behalf of myself and the Disability Minister, where of course we will have a meeting.
We now come to topical. Stuart C. MacDonald. Stay.
Mr. Speaker, in light of some of the commentary around the Employment Tribunal's judgment in the case of Professor Miller and Bristol University, I want to clarify that anti-Semitism must continue to be challenged wherever it rises. We have seen people in this country use their views on Israel as an excuse to display anti-Semitism. We have seen this at protests on our streets, and we see this in our universities. It is therefore important to underline that this ruling does not change the fact that while academics have the right to express views, they cannot behave in a way which amounts to harassment of Jewish students. Disguising this as discourse about Israel would be no more lawful than any other form of anti-Semitism, and the government will consider the ruling carefully and will continue to do everything in our power to protect Jewish people across our country.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday, my honourable friend for Livingston hosted a really positive event marking the start of the Football versus Homophobia Month of Action. Will ministers join me in thanking all involved in the Football versus Homophobia campaign, which includes Rape Sports and the Thai campaign in Scotland, and offer their wholehearted support for making football a safe and welcoming sport for LGBT people?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Of course, yes, we do join him. And I would like to pay tribute to the work of the Minister for Equalities, who has been very supportive of this campaign, as we all are on the ministerial team.
Marco Longe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hear more frequent use of this word microaggression. And as an engineer, I know micro is something extremely small. It's tiny. In fact, it is 1/1,000,000th of whatever a standard aggression might be. Does the Minister have a view on this? Does she recognise it as a new phenomenon somehow, or is it? And how big of a priority might it be?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend will be aware that I too am an engineer by training, so we engineers have to stick together, and we are very sceptical when people introduce terms into the lexicon that are not helpful in the real work of tackling serious criminal behaviour. I am not a fan of the term, and he'll be pleased to know that the microaggressions training was removed from the government campus prospectus in November 2022.
Shadow Minister Ashley Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Under the Conservatives, police recorded rapes have soared to record highs, while convictions have fallen to record lows. It emerged last week that the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner in Cheshire victim-blamed girls wearing short skirts for this epidemic. Why are these attitudes still tolerated in the Conservative Party?
These attitudes are not tolerated in the Conservative Party. I haven't seen the remarks she refers to, but I'm sure that we can investigate. However, I will push back on what she has said about rape statistics. The fact is that the year ending March 2023, the Crime Survey for England and Wales showed that 5.1% of adults experiencing domestic abuse in the year, that's a reduction, a 5.1% reduction, a statistically significant decrease compared with the year before ending March 2020.
Anna Fair.
Mr. Speaker, last month I received a letter from my local NHS trust regarding children's services at Southend Hospital, referring to women and birthing people going into labour. Can my right honourable friend clarify, is the term birthing people required language under the Equalities Act? Because if not, doesn't she agree it shouldn't be used because it's dehumanising, confusing and insulting to many women?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? This Conservative government, this Conservative Prime Minister have been clear that biological sex matters and language is important too. We have issued guidance to trust because there's evidence that clinical damage and harm can come with the removal of the use of the term women from literature. I'm very happy to write to her local trust to point that out.
Miriam Fellows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Scott noted that potential changes to the work capability assessment may force disabled people into ill-suited employment, and they're worried that these will end up with huge numbers of people being forced to do exactly that. What steps is the Minister taking to ensure with her Cabinet colleagues that disabled people aren't forced into jobs that aren't suited for them?
Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question, and she joined me at the Disability Action Plan event yesterday with many stakeholders welcoming the changes and opportunities to disabled people's lives. Many disabled people want to work, and we'll always make sure at DWP we listen to their wants and needs, and they'll never be forced into anything that is not suitable for them.
Dame Caroline Dynage.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. Today at 5 p.m, women's groups and other community groups in Gosport will be staging a peaceful protest about the Lib Dem Council's decision to completely end all live CCTV monitoring. They're worried about the impact on people's safety. Does the Minister agree with them?
Secretary of State.
I thank my right honourable friend for her question. It is important that people understand that CCTV and street lighting are absolutely important in helping women feel safe on the streets. I fully understand the campaign, and I'm glad that she is supporting them. We are doing everything we can in government to reduce violence against women and girls.
Mohammed Yazid.
Mr. Speaker, will the UK government redouble its efforts to ensure the humanitarian needs of women and girls in Gaza are being addressed in line with the UK's commitments under the International Women's and Girls Strategy, the Women, Peace and Security National Action Plan, and the International Development White Paper?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I am working very closely with FCDO on this issue. We are very concerned about the events that are taking place in both Israel and Gaza. We want to see the violence end, and he will know all the work that we have been doing around preventing sexual violence in conflicts, for example. We will continue to do everything we can in order to minimise any impact on women and girls.
David Abbott.
Mr. Speaker, will my right honourable friend tell me what steps she's taking with Cabinet colleagues to help increase the number of female-led businesses?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. Female-led businesses often have particular challenges. In the Department for Business and Trade, we work with the British Business Bank in order to ensure that they continue to have access to finance. We have the Investing in Women's Code. We have a task force for women-led entrepreneurs, and we hope all of these actions together will help improve lives for women in business.
Captain Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister make a statement about the Patient Safety Commissioner's report out today addressing redress for victims of sodium valproate and mesh?
Well, I thank the honourable lady for her question. She will know that we personally, as a government, commissioned that report for the Patient Safety Commissioner to undertake to look at the options around redress specifically for sodium valproate, but also for those affected by mesh. It's only been published today. We will look at the details closely and then report back to this House.
We now come to the start of questions to Prime Minister. Fleur Anderson.
Number one, please, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know the thoughts of the House and the country are with the King and his family. We wish His Majesty a speedy recovery and look forward to him resuming his public-facing duties in due course. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also send my best wishes to the King. Last week, the Foreign Secretary said that we, with allies, will look at the issue of recognising a Palestinian state so that the Palestinian people can see irreversible progress towards a two-state solution. But afterwards, it was briefed that these words had not been signed off by number 10. Does the Prime Minister agree with his Foreign Secretary?
Mr. Speaker, our long-standing position has been that we will recognise a Palestinian state at a time that is most conducive to the peace process. But the most important thing is we are committed to that two-state solution and working with our allies to bring it about.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People in Northampton South are desperately short of NHS dental provision. Indeed, in Duston there is now none at all. So today's dentistry recovery plan announcements are hugely welcome. But can the Prime Minister guarantee my residents improvements within months and not years?
Mr. Speaker, we are publishing the Dentistry Recovery Plan today, and my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will be making a statement shortly. Over 1 million more people saw an NHS dentist last year than the year before, but we know that there is more to do, and that's why the Recovery Plan will make sure that NHS dental care is faster, simpler and fairer for patients and staff.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join with the Prime Minister in sending His Majesty the King our very best wishes for his treatment. Across this House, we all look forward to seeing him back to full health as quickly as possible. Mr. Speaker, this week the unwavering bravery of Brianna Jay's mother, Esther, has touched us all. As a father, I can't even imagine the pain that she's going through, and I'm glad that she's with us in the gallery here today. Mr. Speaker, a year ago, the Prime Minister promised to bring NHS waiting lists down. Isn't he glad he didn't bet £1,000 on it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at least I stand by my commitments. He's so indecisive, the only bet he'd make is an each-way bet.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he says he stands by his commitments. He once insisted that if he missed his promises, these are the words he used, I'm the Prime Minister, and then he said, it's on me personally. Today we learned from his own officials that he's the blocker to any deal to end the doctor strikes. Yep. And he's always, every time he's asked, he blames everyone else. So what exactly did he mean when he said it's on him personally if he doesn't meet his promise?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are bringing the waiting list down for the longest waiters. We're making progress. But it's a bit rich, Mr. Speaker, to hear about promises from someone who's broken every single promise he was elected on. I mean, I think I counted almost 30 in the last year. Pensions, planning, peerages, public sector pay, tuition fees, childcare, second referendums, defining a woman. Although, in fairness, that was only 99% of a U-turn. The list goes on, but the theme is the same, Mr. Speaker. It's empty words, broken promises, and absolutely no plan.
Of all the weeks to say that, when Brianna's mother is in this chamber, shame, parading as a man of integrity when he's got absolutely no responsibility. Absolute. Of all.
Either side. I think the member's getting carried away. Can I just say that our constituents want to hear the questions and they certainly want to hear the answers. They don't want to hear organised barracking. So please, I want no more. Keir Starmer.
I think the role of the Prime Minister is to ensure that every single citizen in this country feels safe and respected. It's a shame the Prime Minister doesn't share that. I welcome the fact that he's finally admitted that he's failed on waiting lists in the NHS. I also welcome that he's finally acknowledged the crisis in NHS dentistry. He's calling it a recovery plan after 14 years of Tory government. What exactly does he think the NHS dentistry is recovering from?
Prime Minister.
As ever, Mr. Speaker, he seems to convene.
Certainly not have enough of the front bench either. Please, I want to hear it. The election fever, I'm hoping, is not coming tomorrow, so let's not behave as though it is. Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as ever, he conveniently forgets the impact of a pandemic on NHS dentistry, and it was specifically because of the close proximity nature of dental provision that it was unable to operate as normal throughout the pandemic. That was the recommendation of the medical and clinical experts, Mr. Speaker, which is why inevitably there is a backlog in dental care and the impact that has. But that's why, as my honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will outline later today for the House, we're putting more funding in to provide more NHS provision across the country, on top of plans that will see the number of dental training places increase by 40%, Mr. Speaker. But I would actually just point out, our plans mean that there will be 2.5 million more NHS appointments, which is in fact 3 times more than the Labour Party are proposing.
Mr. Speaker, there are some areas in the country where you literally can't have an NHS dentist, and he says that's down to COVID. People are literally pulling out their own teeth.
Sorry. Can I just say, I don't need any more off this front bench either. Do we understand each other? Carry on, please,
Speaker, people are literally pulling their teeth out using pliers. It's an experience that can be compared with extracting an answer from the Prime Minister at this dispatch box. The truth is, after 14 years of neglect, this recovery plan is just a desperate attempt to try to recover back to square one. If he wanted to move forward, he should follow Labour, scrap the non-dom tax status, use the money to fund 2 million more hospital appointments every year. But, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is oddly reluctant to follow us on this. What exactly is so special about this tax avoidance scheme that the Prime Minister prioritises it above the NHS?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's look at that record. We've, in the NHS, record funding, record doctors and nurses, record number of appointments, higher cancer survival rates. But what's happening under Labour's watch in Wales, Mr. Speaker? Let's have a look. A fifth of people in Wales are currently on a waiting list. Waits of 18 months or more are 10 times higher than that in England, and people are waiting twice as long for an operation. Their failure has sent the Welsh NHS back to square one, and will never let them do that here.
Mr. Speaker, when he admitted that he'd failed on waiting lists, I actually thought that we might be entering a new era of integrity, professionalism and accountability. Remember that one? But just like all the other relaunches, it's proved to be a false dawn, still blaming everyone else, still removed from reality. It's very simple. You can either back more NHS appointments or more tax avoidance. We know what side we're on. Why doesn't he?
Mr. Speaker, the best way to ensure that we continue to fund the NHS, as we have, is not to make £28 billion of unfunded spending commitments. And just this morning, independent Treasury officials have published a formal costing of just one part of their eco-promise, their insulation scheme, and it turns out that it will cost double what they had previously claimed. Not the £6 billion that Labour accounted for, but £13 billion every single year. It's now crystal clear they have absolutely no plan, but we all know how they're going to fund that gap. More taxes on hard-working people.
Mr. Speaker, this is Mr. 25 tax rises. He's literally the country's expert on putting taxes up, and he thinks he can lecture everyone else on the economy. Last week, he and his MPs were laughing at someone whose mortgage had gone up £1,000 a month. This week, he's casually made a £1,000 bet in the middle of an interview. Last week, he thought even raising questions about the cost of living was, and I quote, resorting to the politics of envy. And this week, he's finally found the cause that he wants to rally around, the non-dom status. When he finds himself backing tax avoidance over NHS appointments, does he start to understand why his own MPs are saying he simply does not get what Britain needs?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take any lectures about getting Britain from a man who thought it was right to defend terrorists, Mr. Speaker. But what we're doing is building a brighter future for our country. In just the last week, expanding healthcare in pharmacies. Today, expanding dental care. This week, helping millions with the cost of living. And most importantly, cutting national insurance. All while the Labour Party argue over 28 billion different ways to raise people's taxes. That's the difference between us. We're delivering a plan. They can't even agree on one.
My constituents and I send our best wishes to the King and royal family. Mr. Speaker, despite the popular narrative, our economy is doing well, with an unemployment rate well below the EU average, strong inward investment and record employment. Taxes are higher than Conservatives would like, but does my right honourable friend agree that a key reason for this is that we rightly spent $400 billion on COVID support, including one of the most generous furlough schemes, in order to ensure that no one got left behind, and that it is our intention and instinct to lower taxes, unlike the parties opposite.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to highlight our record of providing support to the country when it needed it, whether it's the NHS, vaccines or furlough during COVID, or most recently help with people's energy bills. We're only able to afford that because of the strong management of our economy, which is why we must stick with the plan, not risk going back to square one with the Labour Party, who, as we know, have absolutely no plan and will cost everyone in this country with their £28 billion worth of tax rises.
Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I begin by expressing my heartfelt sympathies to Brianna's mother, who is in the public gallery as we speak, and also to send my best wishes to King Charles in what will hopefully be a quick and full recovery. Mr. Speaker, the public are used to the Tories gambling on the lives of others. Boris Johnson, he did it with public health during the pandemic. His immediate successor, she did it with household finances. So, not to be outdone, the Prime Minister on Monday this week accepted a crude bet regarding the lives of asylum seekers. In doing so, he demeaned them as individuals and he degraded the office that he currently holds. So can I ask him, will he apologise?
Mr. Speaker, we may have a principal disagreement on this. I believe, and we believe, that if someone comes to this country illegally, they shouldn't be able to stay, they should be removed, and that's why we're committed to our Rwanda scheme.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, as ever, the Prime Minister does himself no favours, because, of course, the bet to which we are referring was worth £1,000, and it came just hours before the Prime Minister ended cost of living support worth just £900. And his justification for doing so was that the cost of living crisis is easing. So can I ask him, what does he believe leaves him looking most out of touch with the public? Gambling £1,000 or believing that the cost of living crisis is getting better?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he talks about the cost of living. Perhaps he can explain to the Scottish people why it is that whilst the UK Conservative government is cutting their taxes, the Scottish government is raising them.
Mr. Speaker, the thoughts of the people of East Worthing and Shoreham are with His Majesty as well. The Archbishop of Canterbury has admitted that since taking office, the attendance at the Church of England has dropped by 15%. And in the 10 years to COVID, the number of baptisms in the Church of England has fallen from 140,000 a year to 87,000. So Christianity in the UK seems to be on the wane, unless apparently you are from a Muslim country in the middle of an asylum claim, and we are now told that 1 in 7 occupants of the BBC Stockholm have suddenly become practising Christians. Can I ask the Prime Minister, given that the Church of England has now issued secret guidance for clergy supporting asylum applications for these Damascene conversions, who is the Church accountable to, and are taxpayers being scammed by the Archbishop?
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to illegal migrants, we need to have a system whereby if someone comes here illegally, they shouldn't be able to stay. I can tell him that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has asked for more information about the extent to which migrants converting to Christianity is playing a role in our asylum system, and more generally, under our Illegal Migration Act, anyone entering the UK illegally will not be granted asylum here. That's why we need to have somewhere to send them and why our Rwanda scheme is so important. The Labour Party have blocked these measures every single step of the way because they don't have a plan and they won't keep Britain safe.
Sir Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I, on behalf of my party, extend our best wishes to His Majesty the King for a full recovery. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Prime Minister for his dedication and leadership in helping us to restore our place in the United Kingdom and its internal market, and to revive our political institutions at Stormont. The Union is more secure as a result of our combined endeavours, and together we have greatly enhanced the potential to build a strong and prosperous economy that will help to cement our peace in Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, securing peace in an unstable world is vital for all of us. And therefore, will the Prime Minister examine the findings of a recent report by Policy Exchange that calls for Northern Ireland to play an even greater role in the defence of our nation?
Prime Minister.
Can I start by thanking and paying tribute to my honourable friend for his own leadership over the past few months. He and I agree that the Union is stronger for the return of devolution and the work that we've done. I'd be delighted to examine the findings of the report, and I've seen with my own visits the vital role that Northern Ireland is playing through the location of firms like Tallers and Harland and Wolff. But as he will know, I'm delighted in last week's command paper we specifically committed to examining how we can further bolster Northern Ireland's share of the UK defence sector, because it's another essential pillar of our precious economic union.
Virginia Crosby.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister know where the best site for large-scale new nuclear in the UK is? And will he commit to buying the Wilver site, now the only gigawatt site in Wales this year, and make sure it's progressed as soon as possible to meet our net zero and energy security needs and give the enormous boost to the Ynys Môn and North Wales economy?
Prime Minister. As ever, my honourable friend is a fantastic champion for Wilfer and the nuclear industry. I can confirm to her that Wilfer is a candidate for the new nuclear site and one of a number of potential sites that could host civil nuclear projects. No decisions have been taken at present, but Great British Nuclear is working with the government to support access, and we're also developing a new national policy statement providing the planning framework for new nuclear power, and would very much welcome her and other contributions to that consultation.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, last year the Prime Minister and other senior ministers were given the conclusions of a government audit of research programmes at UK universities with links to the Chinese state. The audit flagged up hundreds of programmes of being at high risk of being used potentially by the CCP for military use and other applications in strategic and sensitive areas that are of high interest to an authoritarian regime such as China. A smaller proportion were judged to be extremely high risk. Despite that, the government has elected to do nothing about it. So will the Prime Minister confirm his personal knowledge of that report and explain to the House why no action is to be taken? These programmes have to be continued unimpeded.
Mr. Speaker, we will continue to take a robust and proactive approach towards our relationship with China, rooted in the UK's national interest and values. And in fact, our National Security Act, which we passed last year, brings together vital new measures to protect our national security, and that includes creating a foreign influence registration scheme through the Act, which has been created to tackle specifically covert influence in the UK, and will continue to take all possible powers to keep the country safe.
Two remarkably talented and enthusiastic individuals from Kettering, Becky Horrell and Lindsay Atkins, have put together a really ambitious £2 million bid to repurpose the redundant Gala Bingo Hall site in Kettering High Street into a community arts, music, business and family hub, which would be simply transformative for Kettering Town Centre. Would my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, please be kind enough to facilitate a meeting for us with the relevant culture and levelling up ministers, so we can explore how a combined community ownership fund and cultural development fund bid might get us across the line?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for highlighting this exciting initiative, and also commend Becky and Lindsay for their campaigning. He'll know that our £150 million community ownership fund is there specifically to help safeguard small but much loved local assets, and indeed our cultural development fund, like the one he mentions, is there to support further cultural projects as well. I will ensure that he gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss these plans further and wish him and his constituents all the best with this redevelopment project.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Data revealed by the Centre for Cities showed that after 14 years of Tory rule, towns and cities in every corner of our country have been levelled down, left behind and left out of pocket. On average, people are over £10,000 a year worse off because his party has failed on growth. When will the Prime Minister take responsibility for breaking Britain?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, in fact, what we're seeing is record investment in our towns across the UK, many of which were neglected by the Labour Party for decades, Mr. Speaker. But if we really care about levelling up, what we need to do is avoid saddling hard-working Britons with higher taxes, which is exactly what Labour's £28 billion green spending spree would do.
Speaker, for 27 years, constituents across the Vale of Glamorgan and across the whole of Wales sadly have to wait longer to see a doctor, longer for an ambulance, longer at A&E and longer for an operation than patients in England. There are 24,785 patients in Wales waiting longer than 2 years for an operation. That number in England is 227. Does my right honourable friend agree that Aneurin Bevan will be turning in his grave on the fact that you can't trust Labour with the NHS?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Whereas here in England we have a plan when it comes to education, where we're marching up the league tables and we have virtually eliminated those waiting the longest amount of time. But in Labour-run Wales, as he said, education rates are falling and waiting lists over 18 months are more than 10 times higher than here in England. It's crystal clear we should stick to our plan for a brighter future and not go back to square one with Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to Open Democracy this week, since 1999, at least 391 people have died at our borders. That is a rate, Prime Minister, of more than one man, one woman per month for 25 years. And on top of this, the financial cost of this deadly and failed border regime, as well as the Prime Minister's plan for Rwanda, is estimated to cost at least £800 million since 2014. So will the Prime Minister now show that he understands that the people whose lives he's making sick bets on are human beings and provide them with safe routes to the UK in order to seek asylum instead of more failed and extreme forms of deterrence?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's in fact criminal gangs that are exploiting vulnerable people and leading many of them to lose their lives as they make these dangerous crossings. Now, on this side of the House, we think that's wrong and we want to do something about it, which is why we need to get a deterrent up and running and be able to send people to Rwanda. It's his party that opposes that, so the question for them is why do they remain on the side of the criminal people smugglers?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. February marks Emotional Health, Boost Your Self-Esteem and Children's Mental Health Month. In recent years, something like 6,500 people die in the UK each year due to suicide. And in 2021, I was nearly one of them. Luckily, my attempt failed. I was found by family members quickly. I received amazing care at St Helier and Springfield hospitals, didn't do any permanent damage, and was well looked after by the NHS in the months that followed. And I want to take this chance to say thank you to everyone who saved me, and sorry to my family and loved ones who I put through such an awful ordeal. In that moment, I felt alone and scared and like there was no way out, and that the world would be better off without me in it. But I don't recognise that man anymore. I know that nothing is ever really worth that. Help really is out there, and I'm pretty awesome. Does the Prime Minister agree that one death by suicide is one too many? And will he send a message from the dispatch box today that whatever you're going through, you are not alone, that help is out there, and better days lie ahead?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will join me in commending my honourable friend for his bravery in sharing his story. And I can absolutely assure him that we take this issue incredibly seriously. The new suicide prevention strategy ensures that we will have the actions in place to reduce suicide over the next years, because we absolutely recognise the impact that it has on people, their families, and we should do everything we can to prevent that from happening.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And may I take the opportunity to ask the Prime Minister if he will consider apologising to Brianna Gray's mother for his insensitive comment. But turning to my question, the independent report into Teesworks, released last Monday, throws up more questions than it answers. And it's vital that we now have a National Audit Office investigation. The report was scathing and said there is insufficient transparency to offer evidence of value for money. Shouldn't the government lead by example, and will the Prime Minister finally release details of his conversations surrounding Teesworks, as he was asked to do twice last year?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Lady was talking about the report in Teesworks, as far as I could see, and what that report noted was that the pace and scope of the regeneration had a wide-reaching positive impact on the local economy, and of course it was an independent external report. It makes it clear that there's no evidence of corruption or illegality, and the government will of course respond to the recommendations in the report as soon as possible.
Alicia Cairns.
Speaker, can I give my heartfelt thanks to the Prime Minister for his support for our Melton, Harborough and Stamford villages following the recent devastating flooding. But tens of homes, farms and businesses in Rutland were also devastated, but our county is in effect excluded from ever receiving support in the future due to the arbitrary flaw that is currently put in place. Flood support should be based on the most affected or a percentage of population, but Rutland has to have 1,000th more flooding than next door Lincolnshire for us ever access support. So will my right honourable friend please give a meeting to me and the member for Swindon South to discuss this important issue?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, I extend my sympathies to all those impacted by the recent storms and flooding. We are investing record sums in flood defence across England, and the recovery support framework is in place for families and businesses in every area that have experienced exceptional flooding. I know that my honourable friend is in touch with DLUC ministers about how those schemes affect her constituency, but I'll ensure that she gets the correspondence and meetings that she needs to deliver for her local communities.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, I challenged the Prime Minister on his government's broken promise on building new hospitals by 2030, including in my own area. But now it seems that the government are downgrading existing hospitals too. Children and parents in Eastbourne will be forced to travel for miles if the proposed downgrade of the hospital's paediatric services goes ahead. Campaigners have asked the government to call in this disastrous plan. Will the Prime Minister agree?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, actually, we're investing record sums in improving hospital infrastructure across the country. In Eastbourne, in particular, spades are already in the ground to deliver an elective surgical hub, Mr. Speaker. And I know that there is local Liberal Democrats scaremongering about the future of services. But the local Conservative MP is doing a fantastic job engaging with her community and working with local health officials.
Jane Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday it was my huge pleasure to host the Aerospace Defence and Security Industry Apprenticeships event in Parliament, welcoming 2 apprentices from Collins Aerospace in Wolverhampton. Would he join me in National Apprenticeships Week for celebrating the opportunities apprenticeships can provide in the defence industry and also in our armed forces, who are all in our top 10 apprenticeship providers?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the importance of our apprenticeship provision, which is providing young people with opportunities across the country, but particularly, as she says, in the defence and aerospace sector. And those plans are in stark contrast to those of the party opposite, who have caved into big business and are now proposing to halve the amount of apprenticeship funding and halve the number of apprenticeships.
Kenny McCaskill.
If Grangemouth refinery closes, Scotland will be the only major oil-producing nation without a refinery capacity. At a time of energy insecurity, is it not economic madness to allow a profitable plant to close? And is it not environmental madness to transship oil for refining and distribution across the growingly dangerous high seas? Given the billions that he has received from North Sea oil and the billions that he will continue to receive from North Sea oil, will he ensure that Scotland retains a refinery capacity for Scotland's oil.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the future of Grangemouth refinery is obviously a commercial decision for their owners, but I'm told that the site will remain operating as a refinery until at least May of 2025. And in the meantime, the UK and Scottish governments are working together to seek assurances from Grangemouth about how they are supporting employees. But we remain confident in our fuel supply. And in terms of energy security, which you mentioned, that's why this government is unambiguously backing the North Sea oil and gas sector, because that's how you support energy security in this country, attract investment and create jobs, particularly in Scotland.
Dame Caroline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was very proud that it was a Conservative government that appointed the Patient Safety Commissioner, and proud that we commissioned the Hughes report into medical devices and medicines, which was published this morning. Will my right honourable friend also make me proud that we can address the points she has raised and bring forward a redress scheme in a timely manner?
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful to the Patient Safety Commissioner and her team for their work on this important issue, one which I know my honourable friend has spoken about in the past. Of course, our sympathies, first and foremost, remain with those affected by sodium valproate. We're focused on improving the system and how the system listens to patients, and it's right that the government carefully considers the report's recommendations. The Department for Health will be responding to the report in due course, and the Health Secretary will keep the House updated on a regular basis.
Sarah Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of my Tamworth constituents, like local mom Jessica, have contacted me about special educational needs and disability support. Jessica's son has waited years for an autism diagnosis and doesn't expect to have an education, health and care plan in place by the time that he goes to secondary school. Will the Prime Minister confirm that students that need an EHCP will get them so that they can thrive in school?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course we want to see every child thrive at school, which is why we've tripled the amount going into special educational needs for capital places and put more money in to support EHCP plans. I'm sorry to hear about the case you mentioned. I'll make sure that we continue to look at that in particular, because, as she said, we want every child to thrive at school.
Alex Shelbrooke.
Wishes to His Majesty the King and Her Royal Highness the Princess of Wales. I know my right honourable friend, and building on the answer to my right honourable friend, is exceptionally pleased with the Hughes report that's come out today. And there's been a huge amount of work that's taken across this chamber, from the Honourable Lady for Livingston, the Honourable Lady for Washington, and my right honourable friend for Southampton and Romsey. May I push the point, though, to my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, that tens of thousands of women and children have suffered immensely since the 1970s, and government after government has not done anything about this. I'm proud that this government has done something about it. So can I urge my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, in the strongest possible terms, to talk to our right honourable friend, the Chancellors, to make sure that at the budget we can really address the issues raised in the Hughes report.
Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend and colleagues on all sides of the House for their campaigning over many years on this issue. As I said, it's right that we not only do we extend our sympathies to those affected, that we carefully consider the recommendations from the Commissioner's report, and I can assure him we will do that with all due haste, and I know that the Health Secretary will keep the House updated.
Final question, Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why did the Prime Minister downgrade the role of Minister for Disabled People? What message does he think this sends to them? And will he commit to reconsider this move, ensure the role is a Minister of State? And if not, will he agree to meet with me and disabled people's organisations and explain his reasoning?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, actually, the Minister for Disabled People is going to do a fantastic job, because she passionately cares about this issue, and this government has a record to be proud of, whether it's supporting many more of those with disabilities into work, ensuring they can live independently, or making sure that children with complex disabilities have access to more changing places across the country, because those, Mr. Speaker, are the values of this Conservative government. And Mr. Speaker, I could just say also to Brianna Gray's mum, who is here, as I've said earlier this week, what happened was an unspeakable and shocking tragedy, Mr. Speaker. And as I said earlier this week, in the face of that, for her mother to demonstrate the compassion and empathy that she did last weekend, I thought demonstrated the very best of humanity in the face of seeing the very worst of humanity, and she deserves all our admiration and praise for that.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.
Say it now.
We now come to the statement. I call the Secretary of State for Health, Victoria Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I would like to make a statement on our plan to recover and reform NHS dentistry. But first, on behalf of the entire House and my department, I would like to send our very best wishes to His Majesty the King. His decision to share his diagnosis will be welcomed by anyone whose life has been touched by cancer. And I know that we're all very much looking forward to seeing him make a speedy recovery and resume his public duties. Turning now to dentistry. Thanks to a once-in-a-generation pandemic between 2020 and 2022, 7 million patients across England did not come forward for appointments with NHS dentists. Since then, we have taken decisive action to recover services. We've made reforms to the dental contract so that practices are paid more fairly for caring for NHS patients with more complex needs. And we've made sure that dentists update the NHS website regularly so the public know that they're taking on new patients. This has delivered results. Over 1 million more people saw an NHS dentist last year than the year before. But we know that too many, particularly those living in rural or coastal communities, are still struggling to find appointments. This recovery plan will put this right by making NHS dental care faster, simpler and fairer for patients and staff. It is built on 3 key pillars, and I'll address each one in turn. First of all, we will help anyone who needs to see an NHS dentist to do so, wherever they live and whatever their background. To do this, we must incentivise dentists across the country to care for more NHS patients. And that is why I'm delighted to tell the House that for the coming year, we are offering dentists 2 new payments on top of their usual payments for care. That will be £15 for every check-up they perform on NHS patients who haven't been seen over the past 2 years, and £50 for every new NHS patient they treat who hasn't been seen over the same period. Because we know that patients who don't have a relationship with a dentist find it harder to get care. This is not a long-term ambition. Our new patient premium will be available from next month. Mr. Speaker, we're also increasing the minimum payment that dentists receive for delivering NHS treatments. This will support practices with the lowest unit of dental activity, or UDA, rates to provide more NHS care. But we know that in many of our rural, remote and isolated communities, dentists themselves are in short supply. And that is why, starting this year, up to 240 dentists will receive Golden Hello payments worth up to £20,000 when they commit themselves to working in one of these areas for at least 3 years. These dentists will give patients the care they need faster, it will make dental provision fairer, and it will tackle health inequalities. And Mr. Speaker, we're also delivering dentistry to our most remote regions without delay. This year, we will deploy dental vans to more isolated rural and coastal areas. Staffed by NHS dentists, they will offer checkups and simple treatments like fillings. This model has been a tried and tested success across many regions. For example, last year in Cornwall, a mobile van visited 5 harbours and treated more than 100 fishermen and their families. We will be rolling out up to 15 vans across Devon, Gloucestershire, Somerset, Norfolk, Suffolk, Lincolnshire, Cambridgeshire, Dorset, Cornwall, North Yorkshire and Northamptonshire. This move has been welcomed by Healthwatch, the Nuffield Trust and the College of General Dentistry. And we will let patients know when vans will be in their area so they can get the care they need faster. Mr. Speaker, these reforms will empower NHS dentists to treat more than 1 million people and deliver 2.5 million more appointments. Just as the CEO of National Voices, a group of major health and care charities, has said, this extra money should help thousands of people who have been unable to see a dentist in the last 2 years to get the care they need. And these reforms are just the beginning. This recovery plan will also drive forward reforms to make NHS dentistry sustainable for our children and our grandchildren. Which brings me to the second pillar, growing and upskilling our workforce for the long term. Our long-term workforce plan, the first in NHS history, gives us strong foundations on which to build. By 2031, training places for dentists will increase by 40%, 40%. And places for dental hygienists and therapists who can perform simple tasks such as fillings will also rise by 40%. More dentists and more dental therapists will mean more care for NHS patients. And I'm delighted to tell the House today that we are going further in 3 key ways. First of all, we will consult on a tie-in to NHS work for dentistry graduates, because right now, too many are choosing to deliver private work over valuable NHS care. More than 35,000 dentists in England are registered with the General Dental Council, but last year almost a third worked exclusively in the private sector. Training these dentists is a significant investment for taxpayers, and they rightly expect it to result in the strongest possible NHS care. That's why this spring we will launch a consultation on a tie-in for graduate dentists and how this could deliver more NHS care and better value for taxpayers. Secondly, we will take full advantage of our dental professional skills. Today, even though they have the right training, without written direction from a dentist, dental therapists cannot do things such as administer antibiotics. This year, we will change this, making life simpler for dentists and making care faster for patients. As the President of the College of General Dentistry has said, the use of the full range of skills of all team members will enable the delivery of more care and make NHS dentistry more attractive to dental professionals. Thirdly, we will recruit more international dentists to the NHS. We have a plan to do this by working with the General Dental Council to get more international dentists taking exams, to get them onto the register sooner, and to explore the creation of a new provisional registration status, so that under the supervision of a dentist who's already on the register, highly skilled international dentists can start treating patients sooner, rather than working as hygienists while they're waiting to join the register. And turning now to our plan's third pillar, which is prioritising prevention and giving children a healthy smile for life. This begins by supporting parents to give their children the best possible start. That is why family hubs up and down the country will offer parents-to-be expert advice on looking after their baby's teeth and gums. And as they grow up, we will support parents and nurseries to make brushing their teeth part of every child's routine before they start primary school. Because the evidence is clear. The earlier good habits are built, the longer they will last. And seeing a dentist regularly is also vitally important for children's health. Since the pandemic, too many have been unable to do this. And this is why this year we are taking care directly to children. We will deploy mobile dental teams to schools in areas with a shortage of NHS dentists. They will apply preventative fluoride varnish to more than 165,000 reception-age children's teeth, strengthening them early and preventing decay. And Mr. Speaker, our Smile for Life programme has already been endorsed by the College of General Dentistry. Mr. Speaker, 6 million people in England already benefit from water fluoridation. And to go further to protect children's teeth, we will consult on strengthening more of our country's water with fluoride. Again, the evidence is clear. In some of the most deprived parts of England, enhancing fluoride levels could reduce the number of teeth extracted because of decay by up to 56%. That is why, through the Health and Care Act, we've made it simpler to add fluoride to more of our water supply. And as a first step this year, we will launch a consultation to expand water fluoridation across the North East. An expansion that would give 1.6 million more people access to water that strengthens their teeth, preventing tooth decay and tackling inequality. Mr. Speaker, this is our government's plan to recover and reform dental care. Dental training places up 40%. 2.5 million more appointments, dental vans treating more patients, more dentists in remote areas, more dentists taking on NHS patients, better support for families and better care for children, patient access up, inequity coming down, making life simpler and treatment faster and fairer for patients and staff. Mr. Speaker, we've taken the difficult decisions and we have delivered now a long-term plan to make dental care faster, simpler and fairer for people across the country. We're going to get on with the job and put our plan into action. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State, West Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I wholeheartedly associate myself and my party with the remarks of the Secretary of State and sending our best wishes to His Majesty the King, and having gone through a cancer diagnosis myself, particularly his family, for whom it's often more difficult than the person receiving the diagnosis. And in this generous spirit in which we've begun, can I thank the Health Secretary for accidentally emailing me her entire plan yesterday? It was above and beyond the courtesy we normally expect. And in that spirit, I look forward to receiving her party's election manifesto any day now. Of course, we'll have to write ours first to give them some inspiration. Mr. Speaker, after 14 years of Conservative government, NHS dentistry is in decay. 8 in 10 dentists are not taking on new patients. In the southwest of England, the figure is 99%. 1 in 10 people have been forced to attempt DIY dentistry, Dickensian conditions, because they can't see an NHS dentist and they can't afford to go private.
Order. Mr. Beck. No, I'm sorry, but you did a little bit earlier. I don't want any more heckling from you. I want everybody, quite rightly, to listen to the Secretary of State, except the same, the Shadow Secretary of State, West Street.
Oh, don't worry, Mr. Speaker. I'll come back to the PPS shortly. Tooth decay is the #1 reason for children aged 6 to 10 being admitted to hospital. And unbelievably, there have been reports of Ukrainian refugees booking dentist appointments back home and returning for treatment because it is easier to fly to a war-torn country than it is to see an NHS dentist in England. Well, Mr. Speaker, at least there's one government policy that's getting flights off the ground, because it's certainly not their Rwanda scheme failure. And, Mr. Speaker, let's look at the human consequences of this Conservative tragedy. Labour's candidate in Great Yarmouth, Keir Cousins, told me about Jeanette, a young woman in her 30s who has struggled with gum and mouth problems all her life. She used to be able to get treatment. Now she can't find an NHS dentist in all of Norfolk to take her. She can't afford to go private. It hurts to smile. It hurts to laugh. The pain is so great, Jeanette doesn't go out anymore. And just this week, Jeanette resorted to trying to remove her own tooth. This isn't right for anyone of any age, but Jeanette should be in the prime of her life. So will the Secretary of State apologise to Jeanette and the millions like her for what the Conservatives have done to NHS dentistry? After 14 years of neglect, cuts and incompetence, the government has today announced a policy. More appointments, recruiting dentists to the areas most in need, toothbrushing for children. It sounds awfully familiar, Mr. Speaker. By adopting much of Labour's rescue plan for dentistry, doesn't it just show that the Conservatives are out of ideas of their own and they are looking to Labour to fix the mess they have made? And next time Conservative ministers say Labour doesn't have a plan or Labour's plan isn't credible, don't believe a word of it. And of course, Mr. Speaker, there are some differences between our two parties' approaches. Labour is pledging an extra 700,000 extra urgent and emergency appointments, additional to the appointments announced today. Can the Health Secretary confirm that the government's plan doesn't provide any additional emergency support? Labour proposed supervised toothbrushing for early years. Conservative MPs accused it of being nanny state. Does the Health Secretary stand by that label, or does she now support children under 5 being supported to brush their teeth? And Mr. Speaker, the key difference is this. We recognised our plan was a rescue plan and that to put NHS dentistry back on its feet, immediate reform of the dental contract is needed. Without this, this is a plan that is doomed to fail. And don't just take my word for it. The British Dental Association have said this plan won't stop the exodus of dentists from the NHS, it won't provide a dentist for every patient who needs one, and it won't put an end to this crisis. And coming to the miserable script of the PPS and the whips that's spreading it round the table, if it is really the case that Labour's contract is to blame, then why haven't they reformed it for 14 years, and why aren't they reforming it now? Because, Mr. Speaker, in 2010 the Conservatives promised in its election manifesto to reform the dental contract. They're not just bringing back Lord Cameron, they're bringing back his broken promises. And, Mr. Speaker, people have been desperately trying to get dental care for years, and there was nothing from the Conservative Party. But now we're in an election year, they're trying to kick the can down the road, scramble for a plan. They only discover their heart when they fear in their heart for their own political futures. And the consequences have been seen around the block in Bristol. Finally, Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State is promising reform after 2025, after the next general election. Who is she trying to kid? After 2025, the Conservatives will be gone. And if they're not, NHS dentistry will be. How many more chances do they expect? How many more broken promises? 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019. Mr. Speaker, their time is up, and it's time for Labour to deliver the change this country needs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I tried to help him by giving him advance copy